Hi, I'm Carlin Borisenko. In early 2020, I was the knitting Democrat who accidentally went viral on the internet for going to a Trump rally and then left the party. I became the conservative darling, was on all the shows, traveled around the country, and then realized that conservatives were no better than Democrats. If there's one thing that I've learned, it's that both political tribes are two sides of the same coin. But it wasn't all bad. On my journey, I became obsessed with understanding the woke ideology and the culture war. I broke the story of the city of Seattle doing segregated training with its employees.
How bad has this stuff become? The city of Seattle has now put out, I'm not kidding you, this is according to Dr. Carolyn Borisenko, who's an organizational psychologist. The city of Seattle asked its white employees to voluntarily spend a day off in a training about their internalized racial superiority.
I broke the story that led to the first ever federal lawsuit against critical race theory in the schools. I broke the Coke Be Less White story, one of the biggest anti-woke stories of all time. It got over 30 million views. Coca-Cola's corporate headquarters even had to change their outgoing voicemail.
Throughout the past few days, you may have seen inaccurate reporting on the content of our recently launched diversity, equity, and inclusion training program.
I exposed the schools in Burlington, Vermont for grooming middle school children live on the internet. They called me an unwoke cult leader for that. And the Vermont Human Rights Commission slandered me publicly as being a hate channel. I even got called a hero in Breitbart for exposing that the Washington Post was writing a hit piece on Christopher Rufo. I have broken story after story after story about what's going on in the public schools, from Cambridge, Massachusetts, to autistic sex education, to the Department of Education in Michigan, literally training teachers all over the state how to groom children. I wrote a book called Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life. I host a podcast all about fighting back, and I'm downloading all of my knowledge to you on my Substack, carlin.substack.com. The world is a crazy place. We are literally surrounded by cults on all sides. On this show, we're going to do a deep dive into all aspects of the culture war, and I will show you the dark, dystopian underbellies on both sides. Here are the commitments I'll make to you. I will always tell you the truth. I will always bring you receipts. And if you stick with me, I promise you will see the world differently. Welcome to the cult. Please mount that like button for me and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Well, hey, everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to The Cult. The Cult is a show that I stream live Monday through Friday on this here YouTube channel, on Twitter, X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, whatever, and on Rumble, where we talk about all aspects of the culture war. But you know what? It's funny. When I came up with the name for the show, calling it The Cult, I was thinking about it in terms of like shortening culture war to The Cult. I think about it in terms of there being where I really do, when I say we're surrounded by cults on all sides in the intro, I really do mean it. I think like all of these warring political factions are cults in some form or another. But increasingly, I've been thinking about just this whole idea that, I mean, if we're honest about it, socialism, which is what we mostly focus on this channel, not the bullshit socialism that Republicans talk about when they're reeing about whatever thing they're upset about today. We talk about the real ones, the real socialists, like I show them to you all the time. I think we need to acknowledge that socialism is the main cult that we focus on, and it is a cult. The public school system today is indoctrinating kids into the cult of socialism, starting when they're 5 years old in kindergarten. You know, Chris Rufo lately, and I have a lot of respect for Chris Rufo. There's some things he does that I don't like and I don't appreciate, but overall, I think that Chris Rufo is a highly effective activist, and so I'm not going to be too hard on him when he does things that I don't agree with, because God knows I do things that he doesn't agree with, and he doesn't give me shit for it. I think, like, Chris Rufo is focusing quite a bit on defunding diversity, equity, and inclusion and stuff like that in higher education. He's on this whole thing. Ted Cruz is on this whole thing where Ted Cruz's book, which he blatantly plagiarized from me, is all about, like, how do we fix higher education? How do we get all this crazy diversity stuff out of higher education, as though Ted Cruz knows that, because he couldn't even come up with an original idea for his book. Hi, Ted Cruz. I wrote the original Unwoke book, motherfucker. And so they're all focused on higher education. But the thing of it is that I think that focusing on higher education in terms of, like, ending the influence that the left has in our society is a fool's errand. Not because they haven't correctly diagnosed the problem to some extent. Not because it's not a problem. It is a problem. The cult of socialism made its way into our society through higher education. It happened in when the Frankfurt School came to the United States, set up shop at Columbia University, a little bit before World War II. I was actually researching this. We got into an argument on my channel a couple Socialism Saturdays ago, where I said the Frankfurt School came to Columbia University in the 30s, and viewers on my channel says, no, Carlin, it was in the 50s. It was after World War II. And I said, I actually don't really care. That wasn't the point I was making. The point is that they've been here for a really long time. But since we got into that argument, I started actually researching it. And the Frankfurt School did come to Columbia University in 1937. 1937 was when the Frankfurt School first started giving lectures at Columbia University. So, $2 right tip jar. Kurt, you owe me. Nick, you owe me. But that's besides the point. The point is that they are correct in that the cult of socialism made its way into the American zeitgeist through higher education. When the Frankfurt School, whenever it happened, came to Columbia University, set up shop at Columbia University, and from there they started their long march through the institutions, taking over higher institution of higher education after institution of higher education, until they got to a point where they controlled, through institutional power, through getting these tenured professorship positions, controlling departments, controlling budgets in higher education, things like that. That's how they took over the university. When they took over the university, they took over the colleges of education, which is where the future K through 12 teachers are trained to be teachers. Guess what they started teaching in those in the colleges of education that's training your future K through 12 teachers? They started integrating critical theory into the curriculum in the colleges of education, so that we now have at least 2, if not possibly 3 generations of teachers that have never known anything differently than being literally taught critical theory as part of their training in order to be teachers. They don't know any differently. And then so from there, if you are in charge of training all of the teachers that are going into the K through 12 schools, eventually your ideology is going to trickle down from the university into the K through 12 schools, and that is where we got to where we are today. Everything else beyond that is noise. And so I understand why Chris Rufo is going after higher education. I don't necessarily think it's like the worst thing in the world. I think that if we can get taxpayer funded money, I think defunding higher education is a good thing. I think that sending your kids to college is a waste of time. But if they're going after higher education, believing that if they defund every diversity program in the country, they think that's going to solve the problem that we have, that's stupid. That's stupid. Because they can defund all the diversity departments that they want. They can defund all the gender studies programs they want. It will not make a bit of difference. Because today, the indoctrination into the cult of socialism is in the K through 12 schools. It is ubiquitous in the K through 12 schools. Go onto any school district website in the United States right now and do a search for equity. Almost every single school district in the United States right now has a Department of Equity. Equity means Marxism. Equity means no disparity in outcome. Equity means we all end at the same place. Equity quite literally is the delivery mechanism for Marxism, and they have equity departments in every single public school in the country today, and no one is talking about it because the right does not understand how Marxism is being delivered to their children. It's not in the books you don't like in the libraries that you're spending all your time focusing on. It's being integrated into every single part of the curriculum throughout every single class your children will take in schools. So if you want to defund the diversity programs and the gender studies programs and the college in higher education, which by the way, you're never going to be able to get all of them because the private colleges are going to go F yourselves. We're private colleges, we'll do what we want. And then they're going to go, we'll take away your funding. And then Harvard's going to go, we've got a $40 billion endowment. So they're never going to, this is never going to happen on a realistic level. Private colleges are private. They're not state funded. Like, you don't get to tell them what to do. You can take away their state funding, but a lot of these colleges have massive endowments that dwarf any funding they're getting from the federal government. That's just reality, guys. That's just reality. And even if you did get it out of higher education entirely, it is still at every single level in K through 12 education in the country. So, if we want to talk about what's getting to kids, kids are already indoctrinated into this cult by the time they get to college. You know, when I talked about the Nashville Shooter Manifesto the other day, the number one thing that I heard, again, from the conservative right, who is woefully uneducated on what is actually going on, is, well, Carlin, well, do you really think that kids know what they're being taught in schools? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Do you want to know why I think kids know what they're being taught in schools? Because they're being taught it in every single class, drip by drip by drip. This is not one class. This is not one book. This is why it is so effing stupid for conservatives to spend all their time on book banning. This is not one class. This is not one book. This is integrated and woven into the curriculum in every single class that they take. This is not a week's worth of curriculum. It's not a single worksheet. It's not a video. It is integrated into the curriculum in every single class that they take because the left had a 70-year head start on you. And when you have a 70-year head start, you can really get in there. You can really implement laws and policies and practices that are almost impossible to undo. It's not just one book. It's thousands of books, most of which you've never heard of because you're not paying attention to the right people. I don't mean to blackpill anyone. I think I just might have blackpilled a few people. But my point is this. Your influencers, your politicians, your Ted Cruzes who have no original ideas, so they plagiarize my book and pretend they came up with it. Those types of people, they're not going to save you. They're not going to save your kids. They haven't even correctly diagnosed what's going on. And the reason they haven't correctly diagnosed what's going on is they don't listen to the left. They don't listen to them. There may have been a time, maybe about, 5 to 8 years ago, maybe, when the political right understood the political left better than the political left understood the political right. And I'm not suggesting the political left really listens to the political right either, because they don't. They don't listen to, the left doesn't listen to the right doesn't listen to the left. But I'll tell you this. Any idea that the political right understands what the political left is doing is insane. The political right, what is being served up to them every single day, are right-wing talking points that have no relevance at all to what the left actually says and what the left actually believes. And we know that because on my channel, we watch the left. We watch a lot of the left. We watch the left in their full form. We don't watch the clips cut out of context. We watch the full lectures, the full presentations, the full trainings from start to finish, and we listen to what they have to say, and we dissect it, and we analyze it. And when you listen to what is going on, you will start to see very, 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 very clearly that the political right has no idea what they're talking about. And because they have no idea what they're talking about, they have not diagnosed the problem correctly. And because they have not diagnosed the problem correctly, they have absolutely zero hope of fixing the problem. The only way that you can diagnose a problem correctly and a population correctly is if you open your ears and you listen to what they're talking about. And one of the things that we're very, very lucky with is that the left puts a lot of content on the internet, knowing full well that most people are never going to take the time to watch it, but that they're trying to reach their people, but they don't think people like us are going to watch it. And that's the stuff we look for. And that's what we watch on this channel. And that's what we're going to be doing today. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in the middle. Andrew says, I've assumed that there might be some people who use the language of socialists without really knowing what they're saying. Should I no longer give the benefit of the doubt? With young people, Andrew, no, you should not give them the benefit of the doubt at all. Because here's the thing, and I explained this in one of my other streams the other day, but I'll explain it again because you may not have been there, Andrew. I don't recognize your name, so I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. How the current generation has learned how to speak socialist is through an immersive education where every single teacher they've ever had has been speaking socialist to them. It is the difference. How we learn how to speak socialist, well, kind of. This is the difference between someone learning how to speak French by sitting in a French class in America and being taught je suis pâté pou and like all this stuff about how to speak French. I don't know how to speak French anymore. I just know a few things like bonjour, like whatever. Like you learn how to speak French in a classroom. You can kind of muddle your way through it, but it's really hard to get fluent in a foreign language unless you actually go to the country and you live in the country where the language is spoken. Some people, when they want to learn how to speak French, and I had a friend that actually did this, he needed to pass a French equivalency test and he didn't take the classes. And so what did he do? He moved to France for 6 months. Didn't speak a lick of French at the beginning. He spoke French by the end, I'll tell you what. Because he took himself and he put himself immersed in the culture and the language so that even though he didn't speak any of it at the beginning, he picked it up very, very quickly because he had to, because he was immersed in it. How these kids are learning how to speak socialist is they are immersed in socialist language from the time they're 5 years old through the classes they're taking in school. For those of us who are in our 30s or above, we were not fully immersed in socialism when we were in K through 12 schools. And this is where the distinction comes in. Because people who are older, 30s, 40s, 50s, they're the ones going, well, Carlin, they don't really understand what they're talking about. No, you don't understand what you're talking about. Because people who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, when they were in K through 12 schools, they had a completely different education. It's not to say there wasn't socialism there, but the amount of it and the thoroughness at which it was integrated, oh my goodness, the fly just flew in my face. But the amount of it and the thoroughness at which it was integrated throughout the curriculum when people like our age, mostly there are younger people here too, but like our age are in schools, it was nothing compared to what the kids have today. Now, it is not an exaggeration to say that this is integrated into every single class that they take. And it's not, again, this is not like full-on lessons. This is dripped out through every single class that they take so that they don't know exactly like that it's the difference between putting the frog in the pot of boiling water where the frog's just going to jump right out, or putting the frog in a pot of cold water, slowly bringing it to a boil, the frog doesn't know what's happening. When you are immersed in a learning experience, you understand intrinsically what this language means. Someone who knows how to speak French fluently because they learned through immersion, they might not be able to go in an academic sense and say, this means this, and this means this, and this means this, but they know it intrinsically. They know how to speak the language. They know how it works. Just because they can't teach it to someone else doesn't mean they don't know it. The kids are learning it through an immersive experience. They understand what it means. It's the adults that didn't have the same immersive experience that don't know what it means. And because the adults, again, we're talking about like 30s, 40s, 50s, and above, essentially, because they don't understand what it means, because it wasn't a reflective of their education, they're assuming what's going on in the K through 12 schools is the same as when they went to K through 12 schools, and it is not in any way. So I know it's a cope for conservatives to say, well, Carlin, they just, I know you say it means this, but they're really against white people, okay? No, they're not. Wrong. Incorrect. For all the reasons that I just explained. I want to go through a couple super chats. Naruto, from now on, Nikki Haley is War Karen. Absolutely, Naruto. Thank you for that. Remember, people, anything taught to you before the age of 8 is basically permanent. Well, it's not permanent, but it's like really, really difficult to change. But that is generally true. Stephen B, thank you. I have taken French, Spanish, Italian, and Japanese. Learning to speak socialist is harder. I don't know about that, Stephen. I think I had a harder time learning how to speak French than learning how to speak socialist. But we all have our things. We all have our things, don't we? All right, guys. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to go back. We're going back into the archives. We're going to watch a college class about queer theory. Now, I've actually had this on my to-do list to watch for a really long time. And there just wasn't it wasn't a timely thing because this class is like 14 years old. It wasn't a timely thing, and there was no, there just wasn't a good time to watch it. But now I'm kind of moving into this space where I'm really becoming aware of using my streaming time with people as research to be able to find clips, to be able to show people like how socialists speak when they're in the wild. And so I was like, okay, it's time to go back and watch that course from Yale on queer theory. So there was a movement that started in colleges and universities, and it actually, I was working in higher education when this video was published on YouTube. So there was a movement that started in higher education back when I was at the tail end of my higher education career called MOOCs, or massively open online courses. These things like Coursera or like MITx, HarvardX. Some of you may have taken online courses through these things. This was a very big initiative on the part of a lot of colleges and universities. They were very excited about it, where they were trying to figure out ways how to lower costs. I swear to God, this is real. And the thing they came up with is, we're going to put all of our courses online for free. And if you want credit for the course, anyone can take the course for free, but if you want credit for it, you take a test at the end and you pay us money and you'll get credit for it. This is why there are so many college courses on the internet, right? And so Yale University was one of those colleges. And by the way, we probably should just take a tour through. I actually saw a University of Colorado course in Coursera that was all about queer stuff a while back. We probably should take a look at some of these massively open online course room things and just see what they're teaching. But Yale University was nice enough to put an entire course for us online, Introduction to the Theory of Literature. And there are a whole metric ton of lectures, 26 lectures within this course that was actually filmed at Yale University. And there are a couple of those lectures that I want to watch. And the first one is, I want to watch this lecture called Queer Theory and Gender Performativity. And this is from 2009. 2009 is kind of a magic number. 2009 is when Occupy Wall Street was happening. 2009 is when the New York Times, Washington Post started printing a lot of articles about how racist the United States is. And 2009, or thereabouts, like 2008, 2009, 2010, is when far left school districts all over the country started pushing equity by name as a formalized department in their school district. That's when it started. If you go on the websites of Burlington, Vermont, and Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington, and probably many others, but those are the three off the top of my head, and you look at their history of equity plans within the school district, they start having formalized equity plans around 2008, 2009, 2010. That's when these things started becoming official departments in school districts. About 10 years before people even really knew what equity was. And so at the same time, Yale University was nice enough to put this course online for us. And I thought we would just watch some of the lectures. Now, the first lecture I want to watch is the Introduction to Queer Theory. In this lecture on queer theory, Professor Paul Fry explores the works of Judith Butler and Michael Foucault. Oh, where do we know Judith and Michael from? Where do we know them from? Are they the godparents of queer theory? Yes, they are. Differences in terminology and methods are discussed, including Butler's emphasis on performance and Foucault's reliance on formulations such as power knowledge and the deployment of alliance. Butler's fixation on ontology is explored with reference to Levi Strauss's concept of the raw and the uncooked. At the lecture's conclusion, Butler's interrogation of identity politics, ding, 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 is compared with that of post-colonial and African-American theorists. And you can see right here, it's got a nice little chapters for us, a chapter list. So we know we're going to get the good stuff today. We're going to go into Butler and Foucault today. We've been waiting to do this, and I think it's a good day. Now, the other lecture I want to watch at some point, and maybe we'll do it today, maybe we'll do it another day. What's this? The Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. Let's just pop over to this one and oh no, I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. No, I don't want to go back. Bring me back to this one. I want to watch this at some point. The first lecture on social theories of art and artist production examines the Frankfurt School. The theoretical writings of Theodor Adorno and Walter Benjamin are explored in historical and political contexts, including Marxism, socialist realism, and late capitalism. The concept of mechanical reproduction, specifically the relationship between labor and art, is explored at some length. Adorno's opposition to the argument and his position are explained. The lecture concludes with discussions of Benjamin's perspective on the use of distraction and the shock in the process of aesthetic revelation. You know, might be a good thing to watch at some point. Maybe we'll do it today. Maybe we'll do it another day. But we are definitely going to be watching the queer theory lecture today. Going to see how this goes, and we're going to get to know this professor. We're going to see if he's a good place to get some clips. We're going to see if he's a good source to say the quiet part out loud. Again, this was 9 years ago. So not 9 years ago, sorry, 14 years ago, 2009. They were much more inclined to say the quiet part out loud 14 years ago than they are today. Because today they know they're getting caught. 14 years ago, they didn't know they were getting caught. I'm actually really surprised that this course is still online. So maybe he didn't say anything really scandalous, but at least we'll learn about what was being taught at Yale University in 2009. And I think that'll be informative in and of itself. Naruto, Chris Rufo just tweeted that Florida universities refused to abide by DeSantis' rules, saying to disband funding to pro-Palestine protests. I'm kind of on the side of the universities on that one, if I'm honest. I don't think Ron DeSantis should be defunding student groups for speech he doesn't like. Like, so I think Ron DeSantis is a status authoritarian, and I'm really unimpressed with him. And I think if Ron DeSantis actually wanted to do something impactful, then Ron DeSantis should look into the fugitive pedagogy stuff that I sent him months ago now, showing that woke ideology is still being taught in K through 12 schools in Florida, and how they're doing it is teachers outside the state of Florida are working with teachers in the state of Florida to zoom into their classrooms to teach the things that they're not supposed to teach in Florida. So the teachers in Florida have plausible deniability because they're not the ones teaching it. They're zooming in socialists from out of state to teach it. Ron DeSantis's office knows about this, and they haven't done shit about it. Chris Rufo knows about this, hasn't done shit about it. Dave Rubin knew about this before he blocked me on Twitter. Dave Rubin is like Ron DeSantis's BFF. He didn't do shit about it. So I don't really care about Ron DeSantis defunding student groups for speech he doesn't like. I think Ron DeSantis should focus on being the governor of Florida and actually fixing the problem in the public schools, not just pretending he fixed the problem in the public schools, but actually fixing the problem in the public schools. So, there you go. All right, guys. So that's what we're watching today. Please go ahead and mount the like button for me. As a reminder, we do not smash the like button on this channel. We are not children. We're not teenagers. We don't smash things. We mount them like adults. All right. If you don't feel like mounting the like button, you can hold the like button's hand. You can put your arm around the like button. You can fist bump the like button. You can give the like button a kiss on the cheek. You can do pretty much whatever you feel like doing to the like button, except for smashing, because that is not allowed on this channel because I say so. And but doing something to the like button, like mounting it, will let people know to come and join the stream with us. YouTube is shadow banning me right now pretty severely. I need to work on breaking the YouTube algorithm again. And so mounting the like button helps me do that, making sure you're subscribed to the channel. If you're watching on Rumble, I appreciate you as well. Please do like me over on Rumble, subscribe over on Rumble, that sort of stuff as well. I just have a couple more things before we get started. Number one, please make sure, if you want me to continue doing this type of work, that you are funding my work by becoming a paid member on my Substack for $8 a month, $80 a year. I am completely 100% funded by you. I cannot do this without funding from the grassroots, because I am not taking money from any of these conservative shill organizations that are going to lie to people in order to grift on them to get them to pay them money when they're not actually telling their people the truth. I'm doing all of this on my own. This is like, and I'm very blessed to have an audience of supporters that allows me to do it, that sees the value in what I'm doing. I try to give back to you guys as much as I possibly can. And one of the ways that I'm giving back to you guys is that before the end of the year, I'm not telling you when it is yet, because if I tell you when it is, I'm going to give it away. Before the end of the year, I'm going to do my biggest ever woke event infiltration spy stream, where I'm going to bring you a multi-day woke teacher training that is going to blow your mind. If you want to know what's coming next, if you want to know what is going to be taught to your kids in public schools, where you're going to find out is to go to the conferences, to go to the teacher trainings, where they are teaching the teachers the things to teach in the classroom. So what I'm going to do before the end of the year is I'm going to take you inside a multi-day woke teacher training event. I'm not going to tell you what it is, because if I tell you what it is, then word is going to get back to the event and they're going to try their level best to keep me out. Now, don't worry. It's not just me doing this. We have backup upon backup upon backup, but we still do need to make sure to keep things locked down so that the event doesn't screw it up for us. And it is a multi-day event. I want to be able to bring you the entire thing. All right? Because of that, it is only available to my supporters, to the people who take this seriously enough to chip in $8 a month, $80 a year. If you are a supporter on my Substack, my locals, my Patreon, Twitter subscriber, YouTube channel membership, you will get access to this because you guys have skin in the game. But I'm not going to tell people right now what the event is. I will be communicating with supporters directly as we get closer to it the biggest thing you need to know is that if you want part of this, and I promise you guys, this is going to be crazy. Well, as much as possible will be for supporters, James Jones. Yep. If you want access to this stuff, then the only way you're going to get it is by becoming a supporter on my Substack. And you're going to get to be able to see directly what's being taught to your kids' teachers. And it's going to be amazing. It's going to be great. It's going to be cringe. You're not going to believe it. And yeah. Are the online elementary school teachers also teaching extreme woke curriculum? Yes, they are. All teachers, guys. All teachers. I need you to assume that all teachers, all of them, every single one of them is teaching this stuff to your kids. And again, and Kansas Mama, I know you're relatively new, but you've been around long enough that I think you know more than most people do. This is not a single lesson. This is not a book. This is infused into everything. So yeah, I'd be real careful. If your kids are in public schools, you need to be careful. So guys, when you support the work I'm doing, you're going to get access to the biggest woke infiltration I've ever done. You're going to get access to watch it live. And we'll do our very best to show you what's going on that no one else on the internet is showing you. And you'll get all that and more by heading over to my Substack, which is with the platform that I do prefer you support me on. $8 a month, $80 a year. I can't do it without you. I'm trying to get 200 new subs before the end of the year. For paid subscriptions to be able to fund all this stuff, because it does cost money to do this stuff. So anything you guys donate to the Substack in the form of a membership will come back to support more investigative journalism, more undercover work, stuff like that. And again, if you guys want this to keep going, if you guys want me to show you what's going on, it's got to be paid for somehow. And for a lot of this year, it's been paid for out of the Bank of Carlin's savings account. Because I made a bet that if I showed up and I showed you guys what was going on and I broke down this ideology better than anyone else on the internet, that eventually people would catch on and they would fund the work I'm doing. But in order to keep doing this next year, it's not going to continue to come out of the fund of Carlin's savings account. It's going to be funded by the Substack, or it's not going to happen at all. And that's just going to be the way it is. I've been lenient on this for a long time. I've given the 14,000 subscribers who take advantage of my work on Substack access to the free stuff for long enough. Now it's time where the Substack has to become a self-sustaining entity. And in order to do that, I need to hit 200 new paying subscribers before the end of the year. Just the way it goes. And if people don't want to pony up, then I'm not going to do it anymore, because it's no longer getting funded out of Carlin's savings account moving forward. Because guess what? I don't have kids, so it doesn't make sense anymore. But I think we can do it. The reason I think we can do it is we are already on track to hit that 200 paid subscribers by the end of the year. But if this is something you've been waiting on, trust me. Like if you're like thinking, Carlin, you're really not going to give this up. Oh yeah, I will. Yeah, I will. I'm not joking about that. That's just the way it goes. All right, let's dig into our queer theory lecture. Kyle, the rules of the stream are always and forever the same. Number 1, don't be a dick. You will not insult me. You will not insult anyone in the audience. I can do whatever I want because you are in my house. And so if I want to insult people, I'm going to insult people, but you can't do it to me. You can't do it to other people. And as long as you follow that rule, we aren't going to have any problems. Number 2, no whining. I don't want to hear your whining. I don't want to hear your complaining. I don't want to hear I'm not doing that thing you told me to stop doing, because you are doing the thing I told you to stop doing. Or otherwise I would have asked you to stop doing it. No whining, no insults, no shit posting. The likelihood of me insulting you if you don't insult me or someone else in my chat is pretty low. So just follow those rules and we're going to be fine. All right, let's dig into this. We are watching a queer theory lecture from Yale University. If you guys have questions throughout the lecture, please feel free to chat them in, and I will try to answer them as best I can. Let me just make sure I've got my Rumble chat popped out here so I can see it too. All right, let's get this party started.
I don't think it's ever happened to me before, although it might have, but I can't recall it's having happened, that I found myself lecturing on a person who had.
Queen Beth. Queen Beth is trying to buy my love right now. Beth, God says, give with a joyful heart, receive with a grateful heart. Beth, I am very grateful to you and all the support you give. I know that we don't always agree, but you have been an incomparable supporter of my work, and so thank you. Thank you, Queen Beth of the chat. I do really, really appreciate it, and I receive it with a grateful heart because it really is like it's like people like Beth that do actually fund a lot of this stuff. And so, Beth, I appreciate you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You are a delight to have in my community. That's why you're the queen, Beth. That's why you're the queen. Stephen B, thank you. I have 4 grandkids in elementary school. I want to know what's going on. Here's an additional contribution for the conference. Thank you for that. Thank you, Stephen. I really do appreciate that. Thank you, guys. And this, guys, it's like, oh, no, all contributions are appreciated, Stephen. All contributions are appreciated. But the thing of it is like, this is why it's so important to me to get to like the level of subscribers on my Substack that I want to get to, because I don't want to have to keep relying on the same supporters over and over and over again. I want everyone who takes advantage of my stuff, and thousands of people read my Substack every single day. I want the thousands of people who read my work, the hundreds of thousands of people every single month who read my work on my Substack, to everyone chip in a little bit. And if everyone just chipped in a little bit, then I would be able to do so much more investigative journalism than I can do right now. I'd be able to do so much more undercover journalism. I'd be able to pay for other people to come on board and do this stuff with me. I would be able to hire people. And it's like, if we can just get to a certain place, then the machine's really going to start running, and that's when it's going to get really, really good. So I want everyone to take advantage of this, chip in a little bit, and that way, I don't have to keep going to the well with the same supporters over and over and over again who are already so generous, and I'm grateful that they give what they can. But the more people who give, the less the burden on everyone. That's all it is.
Had lectured yesterday here at Yale. But that's what happened in this case. You read, let's just call it the facetious article on the lecture in the Daily News this morning. Some of you may actually have been in attendance. I unfortunately could not be, but as it happened, I ran into her later in the evening and talked to some of her colleagues about what she'd said. So I do have a certain sense of what went on. In any case, and as to what went on, I'm going to be talking today about the slipperiest phenomenon, intellectual phenomenon in her essay, having to do with what she calls psychic excess, the charge or excess from the unconscious, which in some measure unsettles even that which can be performed. We perform identity, we perform our subjectivity, we perform gender in all the ways that we'll be discussing in this lecture. But beyond what we can perform, there is sexuality, which I'm going to be turning to in a minute. And this has something to do with the authentic realm of the unconscious from which it emerges. So what Butler did in her lecture yesterday was to return to the psychoanalytic aspect of the essay that you read for today.
What does psychoanalytic mean? And guys, how does my volume sound in relation to the lecture? Because I'm having to finagle the sound to make that louder. What is pop quiz for the chat? What does psychoanalytic mean? What do we think when we think psychoanalytic? Oh, Beth, you need a bingo? Okay, I'll get you a bingo. I'll get you a queer bingo, Beth. Freud, exactly. Psychoanalytic means Freud. Let me just get queer, gender queer bingo. There's your gender queer bingo, Beth. And anyone else that wants to play too, I'll pop bingo in the chat over on Rumble as well. Oh. Yeah, so psychoanalysis means Freud. Okay, he's low, so I need to turn my mic down more. And what I need everyone to do is everyone needs to take responsibility and turn up the volume on your personal computer because I can't turn him up anymore. Okay. Well, I guess I could a little bit, but it's going to turn me up if I also do that. So everyone needs to turn up the volume on their personal computer, just the way it goes.
Emphasizing particularly the work of Lacan's disciple, Jean Laplanche, and developing the ways in which sexuality is something that belongs in a dimension that exceeds and is less accessible than those more coded concepts that we think of as gender or as identity in general. And so, conveniently enough, for those of you who did attend her lecture yesterday, in many ways, she really did return to the issues that concerned her at the period of her career when she wrote Gender Trouble and when she wrote the essay that you read for today. All right, now I do want to begin with what ought to be an innocent question.
Is the sound better for everyone?
We're
Let me know.
entitled to an answer to this question. And the question is, what is sexuality? Right? Now, of course, you may be given pause, especially if you've got an ear fine-tuned to jargon. You may be given pause by that very word sexuality, which is obviously relatively recent in the language. People didn't used to talk about sexuality. They talked about sex, which, seems somehow more straightforward. But sexuality is a term which is not only pervasive in cultural thought, but also has a certain privilege among other ways of describing that aspect of our life.
Hang on. Lone Wolf wants to know, what is Freud? Freud, Sigmund Freud. Basically, so psychologists come from either, generally speaking, one of two schools of thought. They come from a Jungian school of thought. Like, I'm a Jung person. I like Jung. Jordan Peterson likes Jung. You either come from Jung or you come from Freud. Freud is creepy. Freud had a lot of mommy issues. Freud, I think a lot of Freud's ideas are projecting. The reason it's louder is because when I turn up the volume on my browser, it turns up my microphone. So we're just going to have to manage, guys. It's just the way it goes. I'm sorry. Sigmund Freud, father of psychoanalysis, one of the four paradigms of psychology. There you go. Jung and Freud are clinical psych, not experimental psych. Well, that's a fair point, everyday therapist. I mean, okay. Let's keep going.
In other words, there's something authentic, as I've already begun to suggest, about our sexuality. Something
Is my mic still
authentic
substantially
about
louder?
that
Please let me know.
than the sorts of aspects of ourselves that we can and do perform. That's Butler's argument, and it's an interesting starting point. But it's really not. It's not yet, or perhaps not at all, an answer to the question, what is sexuality? Now, for Foucault, sexuality is arguably something like desired and experienced bodily pleasure. But the problem in Foucault is that this pleasure is always orchestrated by a set of factors that surround it. A very complicated set of factors, which is articulated perhaps best on page 1634 in his text, the lower right-hand column. He's talking about the difference between and the interaction between what he calls the deployment of alliance and the deployment of, our word, sexuality. And I want to read this passage and then comment on it briefly. In a word, and it's of course not in a word, it's in several words, the deployment of a...
Rottweiler, it's interesting that you mentioned Popper, because someone just brought up Popper to me today. And they said, and I don't know anything about this guy. I think I'd heard his name once, but I don't really know anything about him. I think he's like the regressive tolerance guy, isn't he? but someone told me today that Popper has had a much greater influence on the left than Marx has. And I find that very hard to believe because we never hear them talk about Popper, but we hear them talk about Marx like all the goddamn effing time. But I trust your judgment, Rottweiler, because you know a lot and you've always been on point with your comments. Like, do you believe that Popper is a greater influence on the left than Marx is? If so, why? Can you give me like a too long didn't read so I don't actually have to go and read this guy's work because I really don't want to? They know who they're influenced by. Again, this is like Renan, this is a conservative talking point. The left just doesn't know, okay? They just don't know. No. They know. They know. They know. We hear them talk about it all the time. They know.
Alliance is attuned to a homeostasis of the social body. The deployment of alliance is the way in which, in a given culture, the nuclear
All right. Hang on. Oh, the nuclear. Look at that. The nuclear reproductive unit. We've already hit the nuclear family. As a reminder, guys, queer Marxism is a specific attempt to destabilize the gender binary by abolishing it, which is a direct attack on the nuclear family. Why are they attacking the nuclear family? Because they believe the nuclear family upholds capitalism. Look at that. Like almost instantly. It's crazy. Rottweiler says, not really, Dr. K. Popper's biggest contribution to science was in the epistemological realm with demarcation criteria and how do and can we know what we know. I haven't heard him being quoted by Marxists. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like, I agree with that. Tyrone says no with Popper too. Popper focused on epistemology, so no. Popper just expanded on Marxist theories. Popper, you're right, that is Marcuse. Popper isn't the see. This is why I don't read the literature. I trust other people to tell me what the literature says because I watch their trainings and that's enough for me. Popper isn't the regressive tolerance guy. That's Marcuse. Popper is the paradox of tolerance. That's what I was thinking. That fucking infographic, the paradox of tolerance. Thank you, Kyle. All right, so we're all in agreement that anyone, Keith Woods, who says that Popper is the father of the modern left and is more influential on the left than Marx, we're all in agreement then that Keith Woods is full of shit when he says that Popper is more influential than Marx. Got that, Groypers? I'm going to go yes. Let me just rewind a little bit. I want to hear him talk about the nuclear family. Rottweiler says yes. I'm correct, Keith Woods. Popper is not more influential on the modern left than Marx. Sorry.
Attuned to a homeostasis of the social body. The deployment of alliance is the way in which, in a given culture, the nuclear reproductive unit is defined, typically as the family.
Aha!
The family in itself changes in its nature and its structure. And the way in which the family is viewed, the sorts of activities that are supposed to take place and not take place in the family, because Foucault lays a certain amount of stress on incest and the atmospheric threat of incest, the sorts of things that go on in the family and are surrounded by certain kinds of discourse conveying knowledge, and we'll come back to the latter part of that sentence, all have to do with the deployment of alliance. The deployment of sexuality, on the other hand, the deployment of sexuality we understand as the way in which whatever this thing is that we're trying to define is talked about, and therefore not by any state apparatus or actual legal system necessarily, but nevertheless simply by the prevalence and force of various sorts of knowledge policed. Okay, to continue the passage. In a word, the deployment of alliance is attuned to a homeostasis or regularization. That's what he means by homeostasis of the social body, which it has the function of maintaining. Whence its privileged link with the law. That is to say, the law tells us all sorts of things about the family, including whether or not there can be gay marriage, just incidentally. I'll come back to that in a minute. Whence, too, the fact that the important phase for it is reproduction. The deployment of sexuality has its reason for being, not in reproducing itself, but in proliferating, innovating, annexing, creating, and penetrating bodies in an increasingly detailed way, and in controlling populations in an increasingly comprehensive way. What he's saying is, among other things, that a deployment of sexuality, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, these deployments aren't meant somehow or another to be terroristic regimes. A deployment of sexuality, which, for example, favored forms of sexuality such as birth control or homosexuality,
Holy shit.
Would certainly be a means of controlling reproduction. That is.
Holy shit. Do you guys realize what he just said? He did hit on social reproduction theory. He just said that deploying different types of sexuality that are basically not like heterosexuality within the nuclear family is a way of controlling like the population. Remember, one of the people that we watched from the Socialism 2023 conference literally said that the socialists, the far left, were queering relationships as a way to essentially like destabilize the system and cause their little Marxist revolution. So what he just said is that, so we've talked about the nuclear family. We know these people want to get rid of the nuclear family because the nuclear family supports capitalism. They want to use sexuality. No, this is not about degrowth. Everyone needs to get that shit out of their heads. This is not degrowth, guys. If I have to keep saying this, I'm going to start kicking people out of the chat every single time they bring this up. This is not degrowth. These are two different groups. What you're talking about, Kyle, are the Malthusians. Completely different group. James Lindsay has so fucked up people's heads on this, like they can't focus. I swear to God. What he's saying, and we're going to listen to this again, is that I think he's saying that Foucault probably was the one who advanced this theory that if you control like sexuality, you can control the population. You can like engineer the population to do different things. Okay, let's just go back. The important phase is reproduction. We're going to listen to this whole part again.
Is talked about, and therefore not by any state apparatus or actual legal system necessarily, but nevertheless simply by the prevalence and force of various sorts of knowledge policed. Okay, to continue the passage. In a word, the deployment of alliance is attuned to a homeostasis or regularization. That's what he means by homeostasis of the social body, which it has the function of maintaining. Whence its privileged link with the.
Are you fucking serious? Do these professors understand what they're encouraging? Yes, they do. Because they're all socialists. They all this is an honest to God question. I always know what talking points the conservative influencers are using because they start to show up in my chat over and over and over and over and over again. Who on the conservative right is advancing this talking point? Who on the conservative right that has a massive platform is saying things like, the kids don't understand what they're doing, the professors don't understand what they're doing, no one understands what they're doing. It's just a coincidence that they've taken over every major institution and they control everything and no one knows actually what they're saying. Like, who's advancing this talking point? Because and Amira, I'm sorry to be hostile towards you. This is not personal against you. It's just that I'm hearing this talking point an awful lot, and I want to know where it's coming from. Because whoever is advancing this talking point, they can go fuck themselves. Whoever is advancing this talking point doesn't know what they're talking about. And are going to go on my shit list in like a massive way. Like, everyone's already on my shit list anyway. It doesn't really mean anything. But if anyone hears this talking point come from a conservative mouthpiece of some sort, can you just let me know? Because someone's saying it, because I wouldn't be, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault at all. But like, that talking point I've heard it 18 ways from Sunday in the last week. And so I know it's coming from somewhere. And again, this is not you. This is not personal towards you. I don't want to make you think like it is. I just want to know where that talking point is coming from. Someone's saying it. Is that real? Is Shapiro saying it? It's usually someone at the Daily Wire. Anytime I hear talking points show up over and over and over and over and over again, it is almost always someone at the Daily Wire that's doing it. All right, let's listen to this again.
Law. That is to say, the law tells us all sorts of things about.
Oh, here it is. Fucking Tim Pool. Fucking Tim Pool saying it. Every goddamn time. Every time. Every time. Again, Amira, it's not your fault. I don't mean to be upset at you. I'm not upset at you. If you're new here, welcome. It's a lot to take in for someone that's new. I understand that. I'm sorry for being aggressive towards you. That wasn't my intention. I'm aggressive towards the talking point and whoever is advancing it, not against you. All right.
Body, which it has the function of maintaining, whence its privileged link with the law. That is to say, the law tells us all sorts of things about the family, including whether or not there can be gay marriage, just incidentally. I'll come back to that in a minute. Whence, too, the fact that the important phase for it is reproduction. The deployment of sexuality has its reason for being, not in reproducing itself, but in proliferating, innovating, annexing, creating, and penetrating bodies in an increasingly detailed way, and in controlling populations in an increasingly comprehensive way. What he's saying is, among other things, that a deployment of sexuality, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, these deployments aren't meant somehow or another to be terroristic regimes. A deployment of sexuality, which, for example, favored forms of sexuality such as birth control or homosexuality, would certainly be a means of controlling reproduction. That is to say, and just in that degree, the deployment of sexuality could be seen as subtly or not so subtly at odds with the deployment of alliance, which is all for the purpose of reproduction, or at least takes as its primary sign, as Foucault suggests, the importance and centrality to a given culture, or socio-biological system, if you will, of reproduction. And so these are the ways in which the deployment of alliance and the deployment of sexuality converge, don't converge, conflict with each other. But in all of these ways, we keep seeing this concept of sexuality. But as I say, it continues to be somewhat elusive what precisely it is. Just to bracket that for the moment, let me make another comment or two on the concepts in the passage that I've just read. Let's say once for all at the outset that the central idea in Foucault's text, the idea which he continues to develop throughout the 3 volumes on the history of sexuality, the central idea is this idea of power as something other than that which is enforced through legal, policing, or state apparatus means. Power which is enforced as a circulation or distribution of knowledge, which is discursive in nature.
Power is dispersed through a distribution of knowledge. It almost sounds like taking over the universities to control the flow of information, not just in the universities and in the public schools, in order to control the population. That's what he means when he says power is dispersed through the distribution of knowledge. Does that make sense to everyone? You control the information that people have access to. You have a lot of power over them when you control the information that people have access to.
Nature, which enforces its norms for all of us, for better or for worse, because discourse can release and constitute sites of resistance as well.
If you have power over people through the distribution of knowledge, then you control the norms that people ascribe themselves to. What are some of the norms that the left might be wanting to disrupt by controlling the distribution of knowledge? Do you guys get where I'm going with this? What are some of the norms that the left wants to disrupt through the controlling of the distribution of knowledge? Gender binary, gender, social reproduction. They're using teachers to do it. They're using schools to do it. They're controlling universities to distribute the knowledge. Property rights, all individual rights, the family, the nuclear family, the gender binary, nuclear family, gender binary, capitalist economy, sex education and gender, family, work, power. Exactly, guys. Exactly.
As oppress, which for better or worse circulates among us ideas that are in a certain sense governing ideas about whatever it is that's in question, in this case, obviously, sexuality. So, and Foucault calls this sometimes, hyphenating it, power knowledge. This is absolutely the central idea in late Foucault. I introduced it, you remember last time, in talking about.
So the idea of power knowledge, and again, I don't usually read the literature, so I'm doing this partially to have a cheat sheet to learning the literature. The idea of power knowledge, in this case related to Foucault, because Foucault is the godfather of queer theory being used to disrupt the gender binary and the nuclear family. What this person is saying is that power knowledge is about the practical application of power knowledge in regards to queer theory, queer Marxism, is about controlling the information that's taught in universities and K through 12 schools in order to queer gender, queer sexuality, to disrupt and realign the norms of society. So given that, is anyone surprised that 40% of kids in school are identifying as genderqueer? Because it seems as though Foucault laid out the idea of controlling the distribution of knowledge in order to use sexuality as a way of disrupting social norms. So The godfather of queer theory, queer Marxism, wanted to use the distribution of knowledge through the schools. That's going to be the easiest way to use the distribution of knowledge to teach these ideas to kids. And now, 14 years after this lecture was given, which was given 15 years after Foucault died, because he died in the 80s, 14 years after Foucault, or 15 years after Foucault died, this lecture was given. And today, 14 years after this lecture was given, 40% of kids in schools are identifying as genderqueer. That's how the left plays the long game, guys. That's how they play the long game. Is everyone following? Let me know if you have questions.
About Said, I come back to it now as that which really governs and guides you through the whole text of Foucault. The distinction between power as it's traditionally understood as authoritative, as sort of top-down, coming from above, imposed on us by law, by the police, by whatever establishment of that kind there might be. Distinction between power of that kind and power which is simply the way in which knowledge, and knowledge is not, by the way, necessarily a good word. It's not necessarily knowledge of the truth, but the way in which knowledge circulates and imposes its effects on us. Behavior.
What he just said was really important. When they're talking about knowledge, when Foucault is talking about knowledge, he's not talking about truth. That's important. The things that are taught in school aren't necessarily the truth. But that's not what matters. What matters is the distribution of ideas through the school system. Those ideas don't necessarily have to be grounded in truth. Kyle says that's part of it. Foucault is saying that access to objective truth is unreachable because all claims to knowledge are culturally bound and particular to that culture. So again, it's like attacking this idea of like objective reality or truth. You can make up objective reality essentially, or like what, like how you're presenting it. Adding a quick point to that, Dr. K. Foucault also borrowed ideas from Lukács. Since he started the sexual liberation for youth in 1914 in Austria. Well, I'm not going to go back and read that, Rottweiler. Thank you, though, for that. Where power comes into is in the norms society dictates what we consider knowledge. Society marginalizes other culturally contingent knowledge claims that are not. Well, this is what I'm saying, though, is like he who controls. This is exactly what I'm saying, Kyle. He who controls the distribution of knowledge controls the norms of society. That's essentially what's being said, right? And we're not talking about truth in something that we would consider to be like an objective reality sort of way. It's just he who controls the distribution of knowledge controls the norms of society.
Here, the way we are, or the way at least that we think we are, the way in which we perform, in Butler's term, all of that in Foucault is to be understood as an effect of power.
Hang on. Policing is a reference to norms. I mean, it's a reference to people who get to decide what the distribution of knowledge is and what the knowledge is that's distributed. Thank you, Tate, and appreciate it.
Knowledge. Now, notice, however, in terms of our question, what is sexuality, that Foucault is being quite coy. He's talking about sexuality, but he's not talking about it in itself, whatever it in itself might be. He's talking about the deployment of it. That is to say, the way in which power and knowledge constructs it, makes it visible, makes it available to us, makes it a channel through which desire can get itself expressed. but a channel which is still not necessarily in and of itself that natural thing that we look for and long for and continue to seek the nature of sexuality. So when the emphasis in Foucault's discussion is really on deployment, that is the way in which alliance, the family, whatever the nuclear social structure might be, or sexuality, whatever it is that gets itself expressed as desire, the way in which these matters, these aspects of our lives can be deployed, we still aren't necessarily talking about the thing in itself. Foucault isn't an anthropologist. He's not talking about the family in itself either. He's talking about the way in which a basic concept of alliance, out of which reproduction arises and gets itself channeled, can be deployed under.
I mean, they're basically all linked together. So far as I'm concerned, all of these things are overlapped. They are all linked together.
Understood as manipulated by the circulation of power knowledge. The issue of gay marriage is very interesting, by the way, between.
This is before gay marriage was legalized.
Of the deployment of alliance.
This was 6 years before gay marriage was legalized.
Because there's a certain sense in which the deployment of sexuality is at odds with the deployment of alliance. If sexuality is something that is really just looking.
All right, Bat Scientist has a question. I think you're relatively new, Bat Scientist, so I'm going to ask my chat to answer the question. Don't most socialists favor collectivism over individualism? So wouldn't socialists want to keep families intact and simply change their way of thinking via manipulating mass media? Pop quiz for the chat. Why does the woke left want to destroy the nuclear family? Families are a form of private property. Keep going. We're going to get some more answers here in a sec. The nuclear family upholds capitalism. They want to destroy capitalism. The nuclear family upholds capitalism. Families stand in the way of socialism because families, through social reproduction theory, reproduce capitalism. The nuclear family upholds capitalism. Upholds capitalism. Upholds capitalism. The nuclear family upholds capitalism. They want to destroy capitalism. The families perpetuate capitalist labor. The nuclear family reproduces capitalism. They view children as, no, not personal property, Mary, private property. Private property that families raise workers in a capitalist system. Families equal more babies, equal more workers for capitalism. Also has to do with families and specifically women doing the unpaid labor of raising the future generation of proletariat workers. They want to destroy capitalism because they think it's a creation of capitalism to keep women doing work for free and creating new proletariat members because it upholds capitalism. The family supports You guys are so good. The family supports capitalism by providing new workers. See, guys, when I get so many right answers to a pop quiz that's actually a complicated question, I feel so much. I don't feel like I'm wasting my time so much. Families uphold capitalism. Children are not your private property. Children working for parents are wasted labor the state could exploit instead. Not really, Zacho, but on the right track. Exactly. Really smart chat today, guys. So when Bat Scientist asks, so why don't socialists want to keep families intact? Because keeping families intact would continue to reproduce capitalism. And remember, the number one enemy of the woke left, regardless of whatever moronic influencer on the conservative right tells you, the number one enemy of the woke left is always capitalism, which is defined as private property by them. Not by us. I'm not saying that's what I'm saying that is how they see it. Those two terms are interchangeable. So as long as the family stays intact, they cannot abolish capitalism, which is always and forever their number one goal.
looking around for ways to get itself expressed. Taking advantage of deployment where that's a good thing, trying to resist deployment where that seems more like policing. If it's just looking around for a way to get expressed, it's not particularly interested in alliance. It's not interested in the way in which relationships involving sexuality could settle into any kind of a coded pattern or system of regularity. So that there is this tension, which of course gets itself expressed whenever within the gay community people strongly support gay marriage and see that as the politicized center of contemporary gay life, or people also in the gay community, many of them theoretically advanced, think of as a non-issue or a side issue which loses track precisely of what Foucault calls the deployment of sexuality, simply trying to extend the domain, arguably a tyrannical domain, of the deployment of alliance. To extend, and in other words, to redefine the basic concept of alliance in such a way that doesn't really touch very closely on the deployment of sexuality. So it's an interesting and rather mixed issue that the whole question, the whole sort of profoundly politicized question of gay marriage gives rise to. So
I can't turn up his volume anymore because it's as high as it can go. My mic is also as low as it can go. And so everyone needs to work together here and to turn up their own personal volume on their own personal computer. This is what we have to deal with when we're watching 14-year-old lectures. We do the best we can. So turn up your personal volume on your personal computer. Get a pair of headphones, just the way it goes. I'm sorry, I can't do any better than it is right now. I can't even hear myself, so. All good, all good. You're fine.
That's what sexuality is in Foucault. In Butler, it's just clearer that to ask the question, what is sexuality, is, well, it's just been a false start. We thought it was an innocent question. But whoa, you get into Butler and you see very clearly that you simply can't be a certain sexuality. You can perform an identity, as we'll see, by repeating, by imitating, by parodying in drag. You can perform.
I appreciate the offer, but I already have the browser extension installed. I know what you're going to say because a lot of people have tried to mitigate this. I already have the browser extension installed. It already is what it is. I'm sorry. We just have to manage. But I do appreciate the offer.
Form an identity, but you can't wholly perform sexuality, precisely because of this element of psychic excess to which her thinking continues very candidly and openly and honestly to return. Butler's work, in other words, is not just about the construction of identity. It's not just about the domain of performance, as one might say. It acknowledges that there is something.
Bat scientist, you've been listening to too many conservatives, bat scientist. We're going to beat the conservative talking points right out of you. So would socialists also want to destroy faith and religion because a stable family is promoted? No. They don't care about religion. They never talk about it. They don't interact with it. The only reason that they talk about, bro, you dismiss these people and they are going to kick your ass and you will lose and no one will feel sorry for you because you dismiss them. The only times that these people talk about religion is when they're talking about religion as an a political organizing structure. I have never once heard the far left talk about destroying Christianity. The only people that I hear talking about how the far left wants to destroy Christianity are the conservative Christians. So this is a right-wing talking point. I'm not saying they're promoting religion, because they're not promoting religion. Again, it's just not something that they talk about. It's not something they spend any time on, except for that they view conservative Christians as a political organizing force, and for that reason, they do want to infiltrate, like through queer theology, they want to infiltrate the church to be able to advance their political objectives. But it's not because they hate Jesus. It's not because they're trying to persecute the Christians. I know Christians have a persecution complex or fetish, I would say. It's more that they want the power of the political organizing force. So the idea that that they're attacking religion in some way, that's a right wing talking point. That is not a left wing reality. Because, like I said, Kyle, they are only trying to get to it because it's a political organizing force. That's it. They don't care about destroying Jesus. They don't care about any of that. They only care about getting access to the apparatus as a political organizing force.
Something very difficult to grasp and articulate beyond performance. Its main business is to explain the nature and purview and purposes of performance, but it's nevertheless always clear in Butler as she returns to the question.
Yeah, we were saying the same thing,
the
Kyle.
unconscious in particular, that there is something in excess of, or not fully to be encompassed by ideas of performance. Okay, so we've made a false start. We've asked a question we can't answer. But at the same time, we have learned certain things. We've learned certainly that sexuality.
Look at this. Let's give a round of applause to Michigan Wetland Watcher. Carlin, I just want to thank you. I took my 2 kids out of public schools. My husband homeschools them now, all because I showed my husband your Substack. That is awesome. That's so cool. I'm so happy, Michigan Wetland Watcher. Thank you for letting me know. Congratulations to you guys. I'm gonna take a screenshot of this. Guys, really, the only way, and I mean the only way, to fix the problem of the public schools is to get your kids out of them. That's it. School choice is not going to fix the public schools. The only way to fix the public schools is to defund them. That's it. Get your kids out. Get them out now. Get them out as soon as possible. Congratulations, Michigan Wetland Watcher, for homeschooling your kids. They're going to be much better off.
Whatever it is more flexible and also, in some sense, more authentic. That is to say, closest to the actual nature of the drives. Yesterday, Butler made a distinction between instinct and drive, which I won't go into because it had to do with her reflections on what is cultural and what is biological or not cultural in the life of the unconscious. But for our purposes, whatever role sexuality may play in the unconscious, and however authentic, that is to say, however not culturally determined that role may turn out to be, it's more flexible, and that's the important thing, than any kind of social coding. The sort of coding, for example, that Foucault would intimate in speaking of alliance or deployed sexuality, and the sort of coding that Butler refers to repeatedly as gendering. But still, for both of them, and this is the other thing we've learned, even sexuality, through deployment or through the way in which it can get expressed in relation to gender and performance, even sexuality is discursive. It's a matter of discourse. It arises out of linguistic formations that Foucault understands as circulated knowledge and that Butler understands, again, as performance. Foucault sees sexuality as the effect of power knowledge, power as knowledge. Butler sees it as the effect as it's insofar as it's visible, insofar as it is acted out, sees it as the effect of performance. So now, to take the way in which Butler makes this relationship between...
I mean, wouldn't Butler, though, argue that the performance of gender or the performance of sexuality is a result of the knowledge that you've had delivered to you? So it does seem to me like they're intertwined. Am I wrong about that, people who actually read the literature? Like, if Foucault says that sexuality is the result of power knowledge, which is the information that you've had delivered to you through the school system, and Butler says that sexuality is performance, wouldn't that performance be based on the information that you have delivered to you? Am I interpreting that correctly? I'm looking at Kyle, I'm looking at Rottweiler, I'm looking at anyone that's read Foucault and Butler, because I haven't and won't. I watch this stuff, that's enough. Let's see, I got a super chat coming in from Rottweiler. Although there's overlap between socialists and the new atheists like Dawkins, F. Dawkins, seriously, gave the idea to the right about the left wanting to destroy religion, which is why I distance from it. Yeah, I agree with you, Rottweiler. Dawkins and Dawkins' crusade against anyone that's a Christian was deeply problematic and has caused a lot of effing problems. So F. Dawkins, like, he's the one that started a lot of this crap, and it has nothing to do with what the left is actually talking about. All right, let's keep going.
Between what one might suppose to be authentic, actual, about oneself, and that which is performed, that which is one's constructs to be a self. Let's take one of the most provocative sentences in her essay, which is on page 1711, about a third of the way down. Since I was 16, being a lesbian is what I've been. Being a lesbian is what I've been. Now, what she's doing, and remember at the very beginning of the essay, she says that her whole purpose is to reflect, is somehow or another to register a politicized intervention in gender studies in terms of a philosophical reflection on ontology, on being. What is it, in other words, she says, to be something? Now, what she's doing in this sentence, which is an awkward-seeming sentence, being a lesbian is what I've been. What she's doing is pointing out to us that to be something is very different from to be being something. For example, I can say, I'm busy. By the way, I am. I can say, I'm busy. And I expect you to take it that there's a certain integrity, there's a certain authenticity in the fact that I'm busy. Yes, I'm busy. But suppose you say, suspecting that I'm not really busy, suppose you say, oh, he's being busy, right? In other words, he's performing busyness. He's going around being busy, So imposing on me the idea that this lazy person is actually accomplishing something, right? So the performance of being busy. But here's the interesting point that Butler is making. The ontological realm is supposed to be about the simple being or existence of things. And it's always, in philosophy, contrasted with agency, with the doing of things, with getting something done, with the performance of things. But what Butler is saying, and that's why she says that she takes an...
Hang on, Kyle says, The societal norms are imposed upon you, and then through that imposition, you continue to construct the prism of your identity based on how you perform the norms imposed on you. And so he's saying so this idea of being busy, it's not that he is a busy individual, it's that he's performing performing being busy. It's kind of like a farce, but it's not if you're performing being busy, it's kind of like fake it till you make it, right? It's like if you're acting as though you are busy, even if you might not you're still going to be busy in the acting of though you are busy, right? So let's just say let's and I'm working through this in my head. You are performing being heterosexual because all you've ever known is heteronormativity, whatever, cis heteronormativity, whatever. So you're performing cis heteronormativity, but in the act of performing that, you become that. Is it kind of like you can't perform things that you haven't been taught, sort of thing? This is so ridiculous. Bat scientist, this is not what they're doing. I'm sorry, this is not what they're doing. Destabilize the family by having reprogrammed children to rebel against their parents. That's not what they're doing. Remove the power controls that parents have over their kids. Kind of. Sounds awfully like a way a virus replicates itself. They're not destabilizing the family by reprogramming your children to rebel against the family. That's not what they're doing. It's not about rebelling against the family. It is about how they see themselves. They're trying to socially engineer society so that people don't see themselves as having a gender. It's not about getting the kids to rebel against their parents. Although that might be how it manifests in some cases. I'm not saying I don't understand why you'd say that, but that's just not, it's more complicated than that.
Interesting in the ontological aspect of the question. What she's saying is that there's an element of the performative which actually creeps into the ontological. Even being, she says, is something that in some measure, perhaps not altogether, but in some measure, something we perform. Hence the doubling up of the word being in the sentence, since I was 16, being a lesbian is what I've been. In one sense, yeah, I am. That's what I am. But in another sense, I've been performing it. I've been being one. I've been outing myself, if you will. I have been taking up a role that...
Rottweiler, yes and no. Back to Luke Hartz. Or Luke H. So I don't know how to pronounce that. The idea of dividing family as a Marxist tool is a thing that started with him, but I agree with Dr. K. It isn't everything. That would be oversimplifying it. Thank you, Rottweiler. Tyrone says, Judith Butler, one often deliberately obtuse, complicated, and difficult. Well, it's like Butler is being deliberately obtuse. It's like she's saying you're performing something without being that thing. But if you're performing it, you are that thing. It's like, I don't know.
That can be understood, as all roles can, intelligibly in terms of its performance. So that's why she puts the sentence that way. And if you kind of made a big mark in the margin and said, aha, got her, right? This is where she says she really is something. No more of this stuff of just constructivism, making oneself up as one goes along. This is where she says she really is something. You're wrong. She's escaped your criticism because she says, no. I have been being a lesbian. Right? I've been being one, which is a different thing, although not an altogether different thing from being one. She is deliberately, in other words, on the fence between the sense of the ontological as authentic and her own.
It seems like this professor is also calling Judith Butler out on her bullshit, which I have a great appreciation for. Do you sometimes have guests on to discuss videos you watch for your fans? Not really, to be honest. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility, I suppose, but I view this more like teaching a class where I'm the teacher and we're watching the video and I'm breaking it down, and people in the chat work to break it down as well, and we work together to come up to some common understanding of what they're actually saying. But typically I find, and this is no offense to anyone, typically I find that the vast majority of people on the internet don't know as much about this stuff as me. And in fact, the vast majority of people on the internet are probably years behind me in terms of my understanding. And so having a guest on my channel would just slow me down quite severely in terms of the understanding of what it is. And there'd just be like, it wouldn't work out, is what I'm saying, because I'm way far ahead of most people, sadly. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes it feels like it could be both, but I just sadly don't think it would work in every aspect. Oh, it's talking about Butler. Let's see.
Innovative sense of the ontological as belonging within the realm of performance, right? And she doesn't want to get off the fence. She doesn't want, she really doesn't want to come down squarely on either side, because for her, and this is what I like best about her work, even though it's perhaps the most frustrating thing about it, because for her, what she is talking about is ultimately mysterious. She has a great deal to say about it, but she's not pretending that in what she has to say about it, she's exhausted the subject. That's why it seems to me to be admirable that she stays on the fence about this and not simply, an occasion for our frustration. Come on, come out.
So there's no hope of you doing an episode with James Lindsay and evaluating video together? Yeah, there's probably no hope of that happening. A, I don't think he would. B, I don't want to ask him. If he wants to ask me, he knows how to reach me, but I think James Lindsay is afraid of me, if I'm honest about it. Not that he really should be, but like I think that he is. And James Lindsay used to promote my stuff like a lot, and in recent years James Lindsay has basically stopped doing that. And so I'm just not inclined, if I'm honest about it. Um but maybe people should tell him. Guys, if you want me to like here's the general rule, guys. If you want to see me talk to people, go tell them. I'm not going to go to people and say, can we please do a show together? Can I come on? I'm not going to do that. I'm just not going to. I don't care enough to, and I don't like it. It feels smarmy to me. And I don't really usually want to go on people's shows. So if you want me to talk to someone, you need to go tell them and get them to ask me. If James Lindsay wants to talk to me, James Lindsay knows how to get in touch with me.
With it. I want to know what sexuality. Sorry. Okay. All right. So, with all this said, it seems plain that, and sort of mystification aside, if you will, as well. With all this said, it seems plain that Foucault.
Let's see. Bat scientist, last question as I try to sort all this out. Are you a fan of Rand, and how would you see some of her ideas seek or hurt the Marxist agenda? I mean, yeah, Rand's okay. I don't mind Rand. I'm not like a advanced student of Rand or anything. I like what I've read of Rand. I think that her ideas I think that her ideas are a good antidote to what's going on.
And Butler do have a common political agenda. Foucault, a gay writer who was in the later stages of writing the history of sexuality, dying of AIDS. Butler, a lesbian writer, both of them very much concerned for the political implications of their marginalized.
So I could host you and James. I would happily set that up. I mean, I don't know what you do for a show. I would have to look into it, but if you want to do that, then I maybe, I don't know, maybe.
As gender roles, while at the same time, of course, being theoretically very sophisticated about them. Their common political agenda is to destabilize the heteronormative by denying the authenticity or, in Butler's parlance,
Oh!
originality.
Oh, I knew we would get there. I knew we would get there. What is the goal of queer theory? What is the goal of queer theory? To destabilize the heteronormative. What is the goal of Foucault and Butler? The common political agenda is to destabilize the normative. Let's just get that again. We'll go back to him talking about, there we go. I'm just going to get this clipped, guys.
It seems plain that, and sort of mystification aside, if you will, as well, with all this said, it seems plain that Foucault and Butler do have a common political agenda. Foucault, a gay writer who was in the later stages of writing the history of sexuality, dying of AIDS. Butler, a lesbian writer, both of them very much concerned for the political implications of their marginalized gender roles, while at the same time, of course, being theoretically very sophisticated about them. Their common political agenda is to destabilize the heteronormative by denying the authenticity, or in Butler's parlance, originality of privileged gender roles. In other words, who says heterosexuality came first? Who says the nuclear family is natural? Who says sexuality can only get itself expressed in certain ways that power knowledge deploys for it? All right. These are the sorts of questions, the politicized questions, which these discourses raise in common. So
I turned off the captions to be able to get the clip I needed. That's why you don't see the captions. Hang on, I'm getting my clip. '24, 2009 is when this was. This has been on the internet since 2009, and today the conservative right still does not understand what the goal of queer theory is, which is to destabilize heteronormativity. That is what the goal of queer theory is, to destabilize the norm. Who says that a heterosexual relationship is the norm? Who says the nuclear family is the norm? That's what it is. All right, let's keep going.
So it seems to me that they have a very broad agenda in common. And it also seems to me that they are very closely in agreement. And so, and I say that just in order to pause briefly on the moment in which they seem not to be. You probably noticed that one text is referring to another at one point in your reading. And so let's go there. Page 1712, the right-hand margin. And the context for this, of course, is Butler talking about Jesse Helms having deplored male homosexuality in attacking the photography of Robert Mapplethorpe. And by implication, Butler argues, simply erasing female homosexuality because his diatribe pays no attention to it. And Butler then complains that there's a certain injustice in that because in a way it's even worse, she says, so to be declared non-existent than it is to be declared deviant, right? At least the male homosexual gets to be declared deviant. We're simply erased. That's the position she's taking here. And then at that point, and so what she says is to be prohibited explicitly is to occupy a discursive site from which something like a reverse discourse can be articulated. To be implicitly.
Exactly, exactly. What they're really trying to do, I think, and I would be interested to hear people's feedback on this. What people like Foucault and Butler are really trying to do is to reverse engineer how society formed the way it did so that they could use that to fundamentally alter the norms of society. They're not trying to find greater truths about life or anything like that. They're not trying to just be their authentic selves, just be who they are. What they were doing was reverse engineering how our society came to develop in the way that it did because they wanted to fundamentally change society. And the only way you do that is by reverse engineering how we got there and then trying to find ways to disrupt the process of development. So they see everything as social construction. If you believe that society only formed the way it did because ideas were socially constructed and then performed, and that made everyone believe that that was the way things had to be. So if you believe in this idea of like our society formed the way it did because it was socially constructed to do that, then all you need to do to change society is to socially construct new ideas. How do they socially construct these new ideas? They do it by teaching them to kids in school before the kids are in a position to intellectually defend themselves from the ideas. They're using these schools to socially construct a new reality. Again, if you want to know why 40+% of kids in schools are identifying as genderqueer, non-binary, gender fluid, gender non-conforming, it's because the left is using the schools to socially construct a new reality. Rottweiler said, Dr. K, like I've said before, we're entering ontologies, which is theories of being and the state of being. Marxists believe that socialism is the true state of being if we talk about the philosophy behind it. Well, I understand that, Rottweiler. I'm saying, like, practically speaking, I think what they were doing was reverse engineering things. I could be wrong on that, but it really seems like they were reverse engineering things to me. Yes, we are being slowly reconditioned to, or socially conditioned to rewrite what is normal. Exactly. Tayton, off topic, my kid's school does land acknowledgments before assemblies in schools. Could there be an argument against that being the Pledge of Allegiance is gone, against this being that, yes, I wouldn't fucking let that stand. They're doing land acknowledgments, but they're not doing the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, I don't actually agree with the Pledge of Allegiance being in school either. And I know that'll get me into trouble. I think the Pledge of Allegiance is indoctrinating kids just as much as this bullshit is indoctrinating kids. But like, if they're not doing the Pledge of Allegiance, then why the ever-loving F are they doing land acknowledgments? And why are your kids still in that school? Honestly, Tayton, you think that's the worst thing that's happening in that kid's school? You're smarter than that, Tayton. You know what's going on. Why are your kids still in that school? Thank you for the super chat, though. I appreciate it.
Proscribed is not even to qualify as an object of prohibition. And here's where she gives us a footnote on Foucault. Footnote 15. You know, we love footnotes. It is this particular ruse of erasure which Foucault, for the most part, fails to take account of in his analysis of power. Butler's argument is that in Foucauldian terms, there's got to be discourse for there to be identity, right? Helms's refusal of the category of lesbian simply by omission, because, and of course we know, by the way, that this is a refusal only by omission. Helms's refusal of this category is in other words an erasure of discourse. No discourse, no identity. That is, in other words, what Butler is claiming Foucault's position entails. Discourse creates power knowledge creates identity. Therefore, where there's no discourse, there can be no identity. And since Helms has erased the lesbian by refusing discourse about it, it must follow that there's no such thing as a lesbian. Right? That's the implication of this footnote. He almost always presumes, and we must do honor to that word almost always presumes that power takes place through discourse as its instrument. And that oppression is linked, is linked with subjection and subjectivization. That is, that it is installed as the formative principle of the identity of subjects. All right. Now, in defense of Foucault, let's go to page 1632, the upper right-hand column. A passage that's fascinating on a number of grounds. It's rather long, but I think I will read it. Upper right-hand column. Foucault says, consider, for example, the history of what was once the great sin against nature, the extreme discretion of the texts dealing with sodomy, that utterly confused category, and the nearly universal reticence in talking about it made possible a twofold operation. Okay, here's Foucault saying, this is a category. The homosexual identity as understood in terms of sodomy is a category. He's going to go on to say that it's punishable in the extreme by law. But in the meantime, he's saying there's no discourse. There's a kind of almost universal silence on the subject. You don't get silence in Dante, as I'm sure you know, but in most cases in this period, nobody talks about it. It's punishable, severely punishable by law, and yet nobody talks about it. This would seem to violate Foucault's own premise that discourse constitutes identity, but also plainly does contradict Butler's claim that Foucault supposes that discourse always constitutes identity. So let's continue. The nearly universal reticence in talking about it made possible a twofold operation. On the one hand, there was an extreme severity. Punishment by fire was meted out well into the 18th century without there being any substantial protest expressed before the middle of the century. Discourse is here failing also in that it's not constituting a site of resistance. Nobody's complaining about these severe punishments, just as, on the other hand, nobody's talking very much about them. There is, in other words, an erasure of discourse. And, he continues, on the other hand, a tolerance that must have been widespread, which one can deduce indirectly from the infrequency of judicial sentences, and which one glimpses more directly through certain statements concerning societies of men that were thought to exist in the army or in the courts. In other words, he's saying there was an identity. And that identity was not, at least not very much, constituted by discourse. And he's going to go on to say, as you read down the column, he's going to go on to say that in a way, the plight of the homosexual got worse when it started being talked about. Yes, penalties for being homosexual were less severe, but the surveillance of homosexuality, the way in which it could be sort of dictated to by therapy and by the clergy and by everyone else who might have something to say about it, became far more pervasive and determinate than it was when there was no discourse about it. So that in a certain way, Foucault is going so far as to say silence was, while perilous to the few, a good thing for the many. Whereas discourse, which perhaps relieves the few of extreme fear, nevertheless so imposes a kind of hegemonic authority on all that remain and constitutes them as something that power knowledge believes them to be, rather than something that in any sense according to their sexuality, they spontaneously are. So it seems to me that this point of disagreement with Foucault raised by Butler is answered in advance by Foucault. And that even there, when you think about it, they're really in agreement with each other. They are, Foucault's position is more flexible than she takes it to be, but that just means that it's similar to her own. And as I say, so that fact.
Butler, of course, is always going to be more difficult than Foucault because Butler is a lesbian and therefore has a chip on her shoulder, whereas Foucault, a gay man, is probably going to be like much more, well, flexible, as he said, I would think.
Together with the broad shared political agenda that they have, seems to me
no offense to lesbians.
To suggest that they're writing very much in concert and in keeping with each other's views. Now, in method, they are somewhat different. Foucault is a more historical writer, although historians often criticize him for not being historical. Nevertheless, the reason historians don't think he's historical is that he never really explains how you get from one moment in history to the next. He talks about moments in history, but he talks about them in terms of bodies of knowledge, epistemic moments, as he sometimes says. And then these moments somehow mysteriously become other moments, are transformed, and the kind of causality that might explain such a thing from an historian's point of view tends in Foucault's arguments to be left out. He nevertheless is concerned, however, with the way in which views of things change over time, and it's the change in those views that his argument in the history of sexuality tends to concentrate on, so that he can say that starting in the 19th century and continuing to the present,
I wish so badly that I had like a do-over to go to college again, like still being like young, because I wouldn't want to go back to college at like my age, but like 18, 19, 20, 21. I wish that I could go back and redo my experience at Boston University with the knowledge that I've acquired now. I would have so much fun grilling the professors that were like shilling this bullshit, and all those lectures that I had to sit through that I was like really just trying to keep up because like I went to a really crappy public school, and so college was actually, well, my bachelor's degree was actually pretty hard for me for the first couple of years because like I went to a shitty public school, so I had a lot of, and I had to go to Boston University, which had like a lot of rich kids that went to much better schools than I went to, so I had to spend my first couple of years of college just like actually trying to catch up to like where everyone else was. But like, man, if I could go back now and redo college, like part of me really does want to do, and I've threatened to do this at times, like part of me wants to crowdfund me going to like a local like community college or something and getting a gender studies degree. Like I actually do, like I want to go take college, like I want to go back to school and like take some of these crazy classes just to piss off the professors. And like I would accidentally wind up with a gender studies degree. I would totally, I might actually, if I ever have it, like, I might actually try to crowdfund that at some point. Like, send me back to study gender studies at the University of New Hampshire. I will harangue every professor. It'll be great. It'll be amazing.
Are essentially four cathected beings around which power knowledge deploys itself. And he describes them as the hysterical woman, the masturbating child, the Malthusian couple, meaning the couple who is enjoined not to reproduce too much because the economy won't stand.
See, Malthusian.
Malthusian of deploying alliance in such a way as to manipulate and control reproduction. That's a moment, by the way, in which the deployment of alliance and the deployment of sexuality may be in league with each other, because obviously birth control and homosexual practices can also control reproduction. So as you see, it's not always a question of conflict between these two forms of deployment. So in any case, the Malthusian couple and the perverse adult, meaning the queer person in whatever form. And he says about this on page 1634 in the left-hand column, you get these four types. And he says that therapy, the clergy, family, parental advice, the various ways in which knowledge of this kind circulates have to do primarily with the preoccupation with, tension about, anxiety about these four types. The hysterical woman is determined to be hysterical once it begins to be thought that her whole being is her sexuality. The masturbating child violates the idea that children are born innocent, and must, because it suggests something terribly wrong about the cult of the innocent child that begins in the 19th century, is something that is subject to extreme and severe surveillance. Who knows what will come of this? Scientific thinking about masturbation had to do with the notion that it led to impotence, that by the time you get around, you got around to being in a relationship, there wouldn't be anything there anymore. Just terrible thoughts. Also, it stunted your growth. You died sooner. Just terrible, terrible thoughts about masturbation. All of this dominated the scientific literature until well into the 20th century.
Well, that just shows you how much bullshit is in
and
scientific
then
literature.
The Malthusian couple, which was primarily a phenomenon of what's called political economy in the earlier 19th century, but has prevailed, by the way, in what we suppose to be, and indeed what is, our progressive technology of the promotion of birth control around the world. We must control population is still the Malthusian principle on which we base the idea that people really need to be enlightened about the possibility of not just having an infinite number of children. And so, again, you see that Foucault is right, still to suppose that the notion of the Malthusian couple prevails among us. And then finally, the perverse adult, who is first discoursed about in the 19th century, as the earlier passage that I read suggested, and is still, of course, widely discoursed about, and of course now has a voice, discourses in its own right, a literature, sort of a journalism and all the rest of it, and is, in other words, very much in the mainstream of discourse, and still has controversy swirling around it precisely because of the discursive formations that attach to it.
Nick Fuentes is about to have a fucking cow. Because I was just scrolling through my Instagram and I found a post from Inside History, which is like my favorite account, that says transgender people can now be baptized Catholic and serve as godparents. A transgender person, even if they have undergone hormone therapy and sex reassignment surgery, can receive baptism under the same conditions as other faithful if there are no situations in which there is a risk of generating a public scandal or disorientation among the faithful, the Vatican said on Wednesday. It's moments like this that I'm like, what a time to be alive. What a time to be alive. What a time to be alive. I'm going to tag this on Nick Fuentes right now. He's going to be thrilled. It's going to be great.
So all of this, Foucault takes to be in the nature of historical observation. For Butler, on the other hand, as you can tell from her style, I'm sure that, as in the case of reading Baba, You recognize a lot of Derrida in Butler's style. In Butler, it's a question of taking these same issues and orienting them more in the direction of philosophy. I've already suggested the way in which she understands this particular essay as a contribution to that branch of philosophy called ontology, the philosophy of being. And in general, she takes a particular and acute interest in that. And what she does, I think her basic move is something that I hope by this time you've become familiar with and recognize and perhaps even anticipate. For us, perhaps the inaugural move of this kind were the various distinctions made by Levi-Strauss, the one that I mentioned in particular as accessible and I think immediately explanatory of how the move works is the raw and the cooked. And I tried to show that intuitively, obviously the raw precedes the cooked. First it's raw, then it's cooked. And yet at the same time, if we understand the relationship between the raw and the cooked to be a discursive formation, we have to recognize that there'd be no such thing as the raw if there weren't the cooked. You have to, if you talk about eating a raw carrot, you have to have had a cooked carrot. You can't, you don't just pick up a carrot which you've never seen before and say this is raw. The only way you know it's raw is to know that it can be and has been cooked. Well, this is the Butler move, the move that she makes again and again and again. What do you mean the heterosexual precedes the homosexual? What do you mean the heterosexual is an original and the homosexual is just
what he's talking about? Beth says okay, so what he's talking about is the idea that I've explained this before, that you can only understand something by contrasting it with by contrasting it with something else. So for example, if you have never had if you have never had a cold shower in your life, if you have never gone through the delightful experience of waking up one morning and finding out that your water heater has broken down in the middle of the night and then had to take a cold shower because of it, if you've never had that cold shower, you can never really truly appreciate how amazing a hot shower is. If you've only ever had hot showers, you might I'm sure you don't dislike hot showers, but you will appreciate hot showers on a whole new level when you have to take a cold shower because your water heater breaks in the middle of the night. If you don't know what it's like to be brokenhearted, then you can never really appreciate what it's like to be in love. Okay, you can never understand one side of something without the other. So the example that he just used is if you've never had a raw carrot, then you can't understand a cooked carrot because you've never had a raw carrot before. Right? So you can't understand the difference. We learn by contrasting things. We know we like this and that means we don't like that, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I think is the argument that he's saying, is what Butler is saying. So the argument that he's making, the professor, maybe he's talking about Foucault's argument, I'm not sure, is that heterosexual had to precede homosexual because homosexual couldn't exist if you didn't understand heterosexual first, which I'm not sure I really agree with. But what he's saying is essentially you're learning about these different identities because you're contrasting the different identities. And I'm looking to Rottweiler in the chat to find out if I'm correct in what I'm saying. Because this guy's he's starting to lose me. We're not watching any more of this guy after this. We've got 9 more minutes to suffer through. We're going to do it. But that's my perception is what Butler is arguing is Butler doesn't understand why you need to learn from contrast. Why couldn't homosexual exist outside the bounds of heterosexual? And I suppose she's right about that, but how human beings learn is by contrasting things. Or how they learn the most is by contrasting things.
copy of it. Who would ever think of the concept of the heterosexual? The heterosexual? You know, you're the only person on earth, and you stand there and you say, I'm heterosexual? You know, you don't do that. You just say, well, I have sexuality, right? You could say that if you had enough jargon at your disposal. You could say that. But you can't say, I'm heterosexual. You can't have the concept heterosexual without having the concept homosexual. They are absolutely mutually dependent. And it has nothing to do with any possible truth of a chicken and egg nature, you know, as to what came. In sexuality, the very strong supposition is for Butler, neither came first. They're always already there together in that psychic excess with which we identify sexuality. But in social terms, the idea that what's natural is the heterosexual and what's unnatural, secondary, derivative, imitative of the heterosexual is the homosexual is belied simply by the fact that you can't have one conceptually without the other. And it's the same thing with gender and drag. Drag comes along.
That was an
parodies,
interesting
mimics, imitates
transition.
Gender. But what it points out is that gender is always, in and of itself, precisely performance.
Holy shit! So is the reason then that Drag Queen Story Hour exists and that the left is really pushing drag? Does that have to do with the fact that drag is like performative of it's almost like a mockery of the drag is almost like, okay, here's what it is. I think Rottweiler, tell me if I'm right, or Kyle. Is the reason that the left then is pushing Drag Queen Story Hour and drag shows and all this stuff, is it because drag is kind of like an open mockery of heteronormative gender roles? Is that what he's saying? This was back in 2009, before Drag Queen Story Hour existed. Tayton, you're going to need to be more specific when you say this is what James Lindsay points out. What are you saying specifically? What does James Lindsay point out? No, Brooks, not a mockery of women, a mockery of the gender binary, of the heteronormative gender binary. Am I right about that? Let's listen again. I'm going to cue this up again. I did not see that transition coming. Isn't that interesting? Tammy, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking the specific emphasis on drag. Because remember, this was in 2009. This was before Drag Queen Story Hour existed. Why is drag all of a sudden being brought up in a lecture at Yale University in 2009 about Foucault and Butler? And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he transitions over to drag? Rottweiler and Kyle, I hope you're still here because I'm looking to you two to help me understand this.
That you can't have one conceptually without the other. And it's the same thing with gender and drag. Drag comes along and parodies, mimics, imitates gender. But what it points out is that gender is always, in and of itself, precisely performance.
The reason they use drag queen... Oh my fucking God! I got it. The reason that they're using Drag Queen Story Hour to get to kids is because they are trying to teach kids that gender identity is performative. That's what they're doing it for. To teach kids that they're trying to teach kids effing Judith Butler through Drag Queen Story Hour by showing them that gender identity is performative. They're trying to introduce that nugget of an idea. Am I wrong? That's why it had to be Drag Queen Story Hour to introduce, because drag is the performance of gender. If we're saying like going back to Butler, performing being a woman, they're introducing the idea to kids that gender is a performance as a way to get them to question their own gender and to reject the societal construction of gender that is the gender binary. Holy shit. If gender is a performance, then you can change your gender at any time. Wow. Let's just listen to that one more time.
Lied simply by the fact that you can't have one conceptually without the other. And it's the same thing with gender and drag. Drag comes along and parodies, mimics, imitates.
No, Rottweiler, you're not grasping what I'm saying. The reason I understand the gender is performative. What I am saying is the specific implementation of I think most people might not be getting what I'm saying. What I'm suggesting is the reason that they selected Drag Queen Story Hour as a tactic. The reason that Drag Queen Story Hour was all of a sudden pushed into everything, the reason that the left almost seemed to mobilize entirely around this stupid idea of drag queens reading a story to kids in a library, the reason for that specific tactic was to introduce intrinsically the idea of Judith Butler, gender performativity, introducing that idea to children that gender is nothing more than a performance. So I understand that Butler is saying that gender is performative. What I'm suggesting is the selection of that specific tactic and the mobilization of the entire left around the tactic of Drag Queen Story Hour was specifically to target children with the idea, planting that little nugget of an idea that gender is a performance that they can change at any time. What I meant is drag queens is their entry tool to push the idea of performativity. Drag queens, sadly, are a tool to them. So you agree with me. You agree with me that that was what that was. I've always wondered why it was like drag queens specifically that all of this stuff kind of bubbled up around. I'm like, drag queens are just fun. They put on a good show, not for kids, all this stuff. But it's like, once again, the goddamn conservative right missed the entire point. The point was not to introduce sexuality to children. The point was to introduce the idea that gender is a performance. This is, god damn it, this is how the conservative right fucks everything up. In that they don't go back to try to understand why the left is doing what they're doing. Drag Queen Story Hour was not about sexualizing children. Drag Queen Story Hour was about introducing the idea that gender is performative. Which is so much more dangerous, guys. Sexualizing children does not attack the gender binary. which does not attack the nuclear family, which does not attack capitalism, introducing kids to the idea that gender is performative is what leads to 40% of kids in schools identifying as gender queer, gender fluid, gender non-binary, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Without the other. And it's the same thing with gender and drag. Drag comes along and parodies, mimics, imitates gender. But what it points out is that gender is always, in and of itself, precisely performance. Anybody, this could, of course, take the form of a critique, I suppose, but we're all quite virtuoso when it comes to performing. Here I am. I'm standing in front of you performing professionalism. I'm performing whiteness. I'm performing masculinity. I'm doing all of those things. I'm quite a virtuoso.
How can we perform whiteness if whiteness is about skin color? He just said, you're performing whiteness. How can you perform whiteness if whiteness is about skin color? Yeah, we were going to watch Hannah Dreier at some point, and then I decided not to for some reason. For this, I recommend you look into Hannah Dreier paper on queer futurity. And if there are lectures about this for Socialism Saturday, yeah, I did look into her at one point. A lot of people were asking me, maybe we'll do her for like a happy hour tomorrow or Socialism Saturday.
I mean, what a performance. So perhaps it's kind of hard to imagine my standing here sort of exclusively performing masculinity as opposed to all the other things that I'm performing.
I don't think he's performing masculinity at all, actually.
That too. And I'm insecure about all these things, Butler argues, because I keep performing. In other words, I keep repeating what I suppose myself to be. I'm not comfortable in my skin, presumably, and I don't just relax into what I suppose myself to be. I perform it. It is, in other words, a perpetual self-construction, which does two things at once. It stabilizes my identity, which is its intention, but at the same time, it betrays my anxiety about my identity in that I must perpetually repeat it to keep it going. Right? And so all of this is going on in this notion of performance. So what drag does is precisely bring all this to our attention. It shows us, once for all, that that's what's at stake in the seemingly natural categories of gender that we imagine ourselves to inhabit, like a set of comfortable old clothes. Drag, which is not at all comfortable old clothes, reminds us how awkward, are the apparel of ourselves that we can call our identity actually is. And so it plays that role, and the relationship between identity and performance is just the same. This notion of performing identity should recall for you signifying in the thinking of Henry Louis Gates. It should recall for you, in other words, the way in which the identity of another is appropriated through parody, through derision, through self-distancing, through a sense of the way in which one is something precisely insofar as one is not simply inhabiting the subject position of another. It should also recall for you the sly civility of the subaltern in Homi Bhabha's thinking, the way in which double consciousness is partly in the subject position of another, partly in one's own, in such a way that one liberates oneself from the sense that it's the other person who's authentic, and that one is oneself somehow derivative, subordinate, dependent. And so all of these relations ought to gel in your minds as belonging very much to the same sphere of thought. The way in which you can't have the raw without the cook is the way in which, generally speaking, categories of self and other, of identity per se, simply can't be thought in stable terms in and for themselves, but only relation.
We're not so much interested in what they're teaching or how Judith Butler feels about any of this. We're interested in how this translates to showing up in the real world in a way that impacts other people. So that's why we watch this stuff, guys. Just to be really clear, and Danielle, I don't recognize you, so I think you might be new here. I'm not interested in Judith Butler's feelings. I don't really care. I'm interested in how does what Judith Butler and Michael Foucault and this lecture at Yale University, how does this show up in our current real world, and how does it impact real people?
Now, oh boy, why is this literary theory? You ask yourself. You have been asking yourself very quickly. And of
It's
course,
not.
Butler gives the greatest example at the end of her essay when she says, suppose Aretha is singing to me. You make me feel not a natural woman, because there's no such thing as a natural. You make me feel like a natural woman. You,
Wow.
some heteronormative other who shows me what it is really to be a woman. But suppose Aretha is singing to me, or suppose she's singing to a drag queen, right? That is reading. That's reading a song text in a way that is precisely literary theory. Now, obviously, I'm thinking of Virginia Woolf's Mr. Ramsay in writing this sentence. It's a terrible sentence for which I apologize. Virginia Woolf never would have written it.
Yeah, that's who it is.
But just to pass in review the way in which what we've been doing is literary theory, the Marxist critic would, of course, focus on his, because the nexus for the Marxist critic in this sentence would be possession. That is to say, the deployment of capital such that a strategy of possession can be enacted.
The deployment of capital, thus then a strategy of possession can be enacted. In other words, buying something.
The African-American critic would call attention to white color-coded metaphors, insisting, in other words, that one of the ways in which literature needs to be read is through a demystification of processes of metaphorization, whereby
Wait. Is he seriously talking about using color-coded metaphors in the same sentence as he's talking about capitalism? Did that just fucking happen? That he talked about capital and then said color-coded metaphors, specifically where white is like presented as whole. And this is in 2009 when they started pushing the systemic racism stuff, which is all about whiteness meaning capitalism. Are you kidding me? It's almost as if whiteness doesn't actually mean skin color. It refers to something else as a color-coded metaphor. Oh my God. Rewind. Oh, and there's Marx.
Mr. Ramsay in writing this sentence. It's a terrible sentence for which I apologize. Virginia Woolf never would have written it. But just to pass in review the way in which what we've been doing is literary theory, the Marxist critic would, of course, focus on his, because the nexus for the Marxist critic in this sentence would be possession. That is to say, the deployment of capital such that a strategy of possession can be enacted. The African-American critic would call attention to white color-coded metaphors, insisting, in other words, that one of the ways in which literature needs to be read is through a demystification of processes of metaphysization, whereby white is bright and sunlit and central, and black, as Toni Morrison suggests in her essay, is an absence, is a negation, is a negativity. This is bad, a dark mood. For the post-colonialist critic,
that's literally what the woke left did with whiteness being capitalism. Alan, are you calling me stupid or smart here, buddy? Because the fact that I'm sitting here watching a lecture to learn something new on the internet live right now, if you're calling me an example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, the fact that I'm actively learning on the internet and questioning everything I know every single day would indicate that I'm not stupid. So, oh, yep. Exactly. Someone used words he didn't know. Goodbye, asshole. Again, the children disrupting what the adults are doing.
Obviously, the problem is an expropriated but also undifferentiated commodity. Who? Oriental. You don't mean Oriental. You mean Kazakh or Bukhara or Kilim or any number of other possible. In other words, the very lack of specificity in the concept suggests the reified or objectified other in the imagination or consciousness of the discourse. And finally, for gender theory, the masculine anger of the philosopher, Mr. Ramsey, you remember he could be so frustrated because he can't get past R, he wants to get S, he can't get past R. The masculinized anger of the philosopher masks the effeteness of the aestheticism of somebody who has an Oriental rug, and that in turn might mask, the effete professorial type, might mask and altogether too heteronormative sexual predation, and on and on and on dialectically, if you read this sentence as an aspect or element of gender theory. Okay, I will certainly end there. And next time, we'll take up the way in which what we've been talking about for a few lectures, the construction of identity, of things, which has obviously been one of the common features of this course, is theorized at an even more abstract level with certain conclusions.
All right, I guess that's it. And I don't want to listen to that guy anymore. But that was pretty crazy. Hang on, let me turn down the volume. No more. I don't want any more from you, buddy. No more. Hang on. I'm resetting my volume so I can actually hear myself again. All right. So we got a couple good clips out of that. I think that thing about, so the thing about Drag Queen Story Hour is obviously like the most eventful thing in that whole thing, which is the specific reason why they implemented Drag Queen Story Hour, which once again, the conservative right has just effed up 19 Ways from Sunday. And this stuff honestly really pisses me off. It really pisses me off that the conservative right for years has been about, it's sexualizing children, it's sexualizing children, it's sexualizing children, it's sexualizing children, groomer. And because they did that, they missed the actual point of what Drag Queen Story Hour actually was, which was like, it was about introducing the idea that gender is performative. That's what it actually was. And because, again, the conservative right did not understand the problem they were fighting, the solutions that they came up with are not actually going to fix the problem. Because even if you get the idea of even if you ban Drag Queen Story Hour entirely, which they are never going to be able to do, because libraries are public institutions and therefore everyone has access to the same resources, so they're never going to be able to ban it. But even if they did, the left would just take that idea that gender is performative and they would introduce it in a new way. So that idea, that nugget of the idea, this is the question that I have. How many ways is the left currently introducing the idea to kids that gender is performative? That's what needs to be paid attention to, not the sexualization bit, which it wasn't about sexualization in the first place. How many ways is the left introducing to kids the idea that gender is performative? They're doing it through Drag Queen Story Hour. They're doing it through social emotional learning. How else are they doing it? Ellie, this is not the point. This is not the fucking point. I'm just going to start embarrassing people who like willfully miss the point. This is not the fucking point. Adults should be able to do whatever they want. I don't give a flying flip about drag. I care about the woke left socially engineering our world by proactively teaching kids at a young age that gender is performative. That's what we care about. I don't think you are agreeing with me because you're not articulating it properly. They're doing it through Drag Queen Story Hour. They're doing it through social emotional learning. They're doing it through children's books. They're doing it through games. Well, no, drag is sexual. This is not a good argument. Drag is sexual, but that's not the problem. The problem is that it's introducing to kids that gender is performative as a strategy to disrupt the gender binary. TV shows, Prometheus says in the chat. Children's TV shows have non-binary characters. Not the point. Not the point. Not the point at all. Not the point at all. In any way. Not the fucking point. The point is, God fucking damn it. I can't even get my own chat to listen to me. The point is that the goal of queer theory is to abolish the gender binary. In order to do that, they need to get kids to question the idea of gender. In order to do that, they introduce the idea that gender is performative in 8,000 different ways. And the right is so focused on grooming, 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 that they miss the actual problem, which is the introduction of the idea that gender is performative. And all of the different ways in which they introduce the idea to kids that gender is performative. We are so fucked. We are so fucked. It's not even funny how fucked we are. It is not even funny how fucked we are. All right. That's all I have for right now. I may do a bitchy stream later. I don't know. I kind of feel I'm feeling the need to take out my aggression on the conservative right on something. I'm like stabbing my yarn with my knitting needle right now. I'm feeling the need to be like bitchy about something. So I might do a stream later. I might not. I don't know. Kyle, the gender binary is one of the only things that matter. There are two things, Kyle, that need to be upheld in order for the left to lose. One of those things is the gender binary. The other is capitalism, as in private property. So anything other than the gender binary and capitalism defined as private property, which is how they define it, I don't care about anything else. I do not care about anything else. I don't care. Queer theory is opposition to anything normal. They're attacking Kyle. Every single thing they are attacking, every norm of society that they are attacking, goes through the gender binary. The nuclear family goes through the gender binary. They can't get to the nuclear family as long as the gender binary is upheld. All of these things relate back to the gender binary, bro. Everything they are attacking in society that actually fucking matters goes through the gender binary. If they do not destabilize the gender binary, then they lose. Nothing else matters. And no one understands this, which is why anytime someone is not getting this in my chat, I will keep correcting it until people fucking get it. There are two things that need to be upheld: capitalism as in private property and the gender binary. With those two things upheld, and they're deeply interrelated so far as the woke left is concerned, because all of their attacks, every single big attack that they're making, is on either private property or the gender binary or both. So anything beyond that, I'm sorry, I don't care about. Don't care. I don't care if kids are reading about books with sex in them. I don't care. That's not an attack on the gender binary. You might not like it, but it's not an attack on the gender binary. There is a difference between introducing what sex is to kids and getting them to question their gender. Those are two really different things. And conservatives are spending all their time reading about the one and getting distracted by the one and ignoring the other because they don't fucking understand it, because most of them aren't smart enough to understand it. And so that's why the left keeps hammering the other, because they're distracting conservatives with the sex. When the real attack is over here: gender binary. Oh, trans, those evil trans people, they, them, she, like, I'm not using the pronouns, I'm not using their name, Bruce Jenner. When the real attack isn't on trans people or getting people to trans themselves, it's about the gender binary. It's the same thing with, like, convincing them that they're anti-white, anti-white, white genocide, white people are persecuted, they hate white people, when the real attack isn't on white people. It's on capitalism and private property. The left is so fucking good at playing the right like a fiddle, it's not even funny. They know how to do it so masterfully. We are so fucked. We are so 19 Ways from Sunday fucked. So I'm going to go take a break. I might be back later. I might not. I don't know yet. If I'm back later, it's going to be a bitchy stream. I'll tell you that. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. I'll see you tomorrow for happy hour. Bye.